It was just another ordinary morning at Riverdale High, one of the most well-regarded schools nestled in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. The sun hung lazily in the sky as the first bell rang, and the familiar scene played out in the hallways. Clusters of students chatting in animated groups, some hurriedly finishing last-minute homework, and others checking their phones for any updates before class. But for Ethan Walker, this morning didn't feel quite so ordinary. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something weighed heavy in his chest as he walked toward his locker. Maybe it was exhaustion from the early morning chores. Maybe it was the way people glanced at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Or maybe it was the simple fact that in this school full of the sons and daughters of doctors, attorneys, and tech entrepreneurs, he always felt like he didn't quite belong. Ethan wasn't ashamed of who he was. He came from a proud lineage of farmers. His grandfather, Nathaniel Walker, had started with nothing and built an agricultural empire, but people rarely looked past the soil, still clinging to Ethan's boots or the calluses on his hands. Every morning before the sun rose, he fed livestock, checked irrigation lines, and worked alongside his family. He never thought twice about it until he stepped inside Riverdale High. At school, he was a boy of few words. His silence was often misunderstood. Some mistook it for disinterest, others took it as weakness. And like any high school setting, some took it as an opportunity. As Ethan stepped into his history classroom that morning, his gut tightened. The cold, assessing gaze of MS. Clarissa Whitmore met his. She was known for her rigid expectations and uncompromising discipline. Her lessons were thorough, but her tone often carried an air of superiority that made even the most confident students second-guess themselves. Rumor had it she was a stickler because her father had been a history professor at a prestigious university, and she felt an obligation to uphold some unspoken legacy. Whatever her reason, mess. Whitmore ruled room 204 with an iron fist. The class settled into their seats, and MS. Whitmore began the lecture. Today's topic, the Civil War. Maps unfurled on the board, dates were scribbled in neat chalk across the slate, and discussions turned to strategies, battles, and political motives. But Ethan found it hard to focus. The exhaustion from waking before dawn to tend to the farm animals made his eyelids feel heavy. His fingers still had tiny scratches from mending a fence earlier that morning. Then came a question. Mr. Walker, MS. Whitmore called sharply, her voice slicing through the classroom murmur like a blade. Perhaps you can tell us which Union general was responsible for the march to the sea? Ethan blinked. His mind raced, trying to pull the answer from his memory. He knew it. He had read about it last night after dinner. His fingers tapped lightly on his desk as he grasped at the elusive name. He hesitated. MS. Whitmore crossed her arms, her lips thinning. Mr. Walker, she repeated, this time with a bite of impatience. Surely you can offer more than blank stares. Unless, of course, your time is better spent slopping hogs and plowing dirt. The classroom rippled with muffled snickers. Ethan felt the heat rise in his face. His throat tightened, but he remained silent. He wasn't sure which hurt more, the laughter of his classmates or the dismissive disdain in his teacher's voice. I don't see much point, MS. Whitmore continued, her gaze sweeping coldly over him, in wasting time on students who are clearly not suited for academics. Perhaps it's best if you stick to what you know. A hush fell over the room. Even those who had laughed earlier squirmed in their seats, suddenly unsure if they had gone too far. Ethan stood slowly, his knuckles white against the wooden edge of his desk. His voice, when it came, was steady but low. I may not be the smartest person in this room, he said, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve respect. MS. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Then prove it, she said curtly. Otherwise, leave my classroom. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ethan gathered his books, tucked them under his arm, and walked out of room 204. He didn't look back. His heart pounded as he crossed the hallway. The humiliation stung deep, but something else was burning in him now. Resolve. The next day, Riverdale High was abuzz with its usual chatter. Students were filing into their classes when a rhythmic thudding sound filled the air. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The noise grew louder, and soon heads turned toward the sky. From beyond the rooftops came a sleek black helicopter, its polished surface gleaming under the morning sun as it descended onto the school's football field. Students poured out of classrooms, whispering and pointing. Teachers joined them, their faces puzzled as they watched the helicopter settle onto the turf. The door opened, and out stepped a tall, commanding man dressed in an immaculately tailored suit. His posture was straight, his movements purposeful. This was Nathaniel Walker, Ethan's grandfather. Though the students at Riverdale High had never seen him in person, his reputation preceded him. He wasn't just a farmer. He was the mind behind Walker Agri-Solutions, a sustainable farming empire that supplied organic produce to restaurants, grocery chains, and schools all over Texas. He had pioneered innovations that made his farm a model for environmental stewardship and efficiency. Behind him, Ethan emerged from the helicopter. His back was straighter than before, his expression unreadable. They walked together toward the school building as whispers rippled through the crowd. Inside the main hallway, the silence was deafening. Students stepped aside as Nathaniel Walker approached room 204. Ms. Whitmore stood by the doorway, her composure visibly shaken. Ms. Whitmore, Nathaniel said, his deep baritone resonating down the corridor. I understand there was an issue yesterday concerning my grandson. Ms. Whitmore opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Mr. Walker, she finally said, recovering a fraction of her usual poise. I can assure you, I treat all my students equally. Nathaniel's gaze was steady. Is that so? He asked. Because I have here, he pulled a check from his coat pocket, a rather large donation receipt. This school benefits significantly from the Walker Foundation, as you well know. I personally funded the new science labs. I also sponsor your department's historical research programs. Ms. Whitmore's face lost what little color it had. Nathaniel took a step closer. And yet, he continued, you saw fit to humiliate my grandson because of his background. Let me remind you, Ms. Whitmore, it is farmers like us who put food on your table. I raised Ethan to understand that dignity comes from hard work. Perhaps you should educate yourself on that fact. There was a murmur among the students. Some exchanged looks, others nodded quietly. Ethan stepped forward then, his voice clear. I'm not asking for special treatment, he said. I just want the same respect everyone else gets. Ms. Whitmore struggled to meet his gaze, her shoulders stiff. Understand, she said quietly. I apologize, Ethan. Nathaniel gave a faint smile. Good, he said, because respect isn't handed out based on wealth or status. It's earned through integrity, and my grandson has that in spades. The students watching erupted in cheers. Some clapped, others called Ethan's name. Even students who had never spoken to him before gave him nods of approval. From that day forward, Ethan walked through Riverdale High with his head high, not because his grandfather had shown up in a helicopter, but because he had stood his ground and shown who he truly was. As for Ms. Whitmore, she never underestimated another student again.